Believe it or not, we are once again facing the danger of Sony possibly mucking up Spider-Man to another level that nobody thought could happen after the last time, which of course was the situation where they took Spider-Man out of the MCU. So the very same people that I talked to that confirmed that to me a year before it happened, which got me a lot of hate up until it was confirmed, have given me some new details on Sony and what they're doing with Spider-Man. So this is going to be a much longer video. We are in for a much bigger deep dive into this whole situation, and I got to reflect on the entire history of Spider-Man on film to get to what we're talking about. So without further ado, let's get into this video and why Sony is in danger of ruining Spider-Man again. So before we get to the modern day stuff, we really do need to go all the way back to the beginning. Back to the 90s where this entire story, saga, whatever you will, starts. And it starts not with the initial drafts of Spider-Man from James Cameron or anything like that. It starts with Sam Raimi's version of Spider-Man, which of course was produced by the one and only Avi Arad, who has his hands tied up with Spider-Man in every corner of Spider-Man, all the way back since the whole, action figures related to Spider-Man the Animated Series and being attached to so many live-action versions of so many characters. Avi Arad is sort of the key to this story for now. Along with him, we will be looking also at Amy Pascal and what happened. So let's start with the Raimi trilogy. So at the time that Sony got the Spider-Man license and rights, they owned the license and rights for everything. We are talking about everything Spider-Man. The merch that was being put out, of course, the cartoons, everything they had their hands on was Spider-Man related. Like, they were the sole owners of this entire thing. And this is important to what's going on, because they, at Sony, along with the executive producers, aka Avi and Amy, were literally like attached at the hip with Spider-Man. So a couple years go by after the whole Spider-Man 3 thing, and we're going to get back to that in just a minute, but they sold all the rights to everything Spider-Man back to Marvel. The only thing they kept was the rights to the films. And again, this is a major component here. But we do gotta rewind this back to Spider-Man 1. So starting with Spider-Man 1, there was already some cracks in the armor that were showing. And largely Spider-Man 1 was allowed to be what Sam Raimi wanted it to be, with little oversight from Sony. There were still mandates due to action figures, but largely that went to the video game stuff, and they were able to reach a deal where, hey, we can produce these video games, bring some of the cast back, we can make action figures and extra villains out of this, so just do Green Goblin. We get on to Spider-Man 2. After the huge success of Spider-Man 1, the budget goes up, the action figures were through the roof, the posters were selling, the video game for the first Spider-Man did well. The second game was seen as something wholly new and different and fresh because it was taken after the whole open world craze that was just a couple years prior, started by Grand Theft Auto 3. So again, Sony largely said, hey, do the same thing, do your own thing, Sam, give us another great sequel. And he does. But Spider-Man 2 ends up making less than Spider-Man 1. This is where panic started, because Sony believed it was the line will go up infinitely, and that's not it. Spider-Man 3 starts production. We all know what's going on with Sandman as the primary villain. That's the way they're taking it. During literally the final 2 months of run-up to start of production, Avi Arad shows up along with Amy Pascal, and they go, we want Venom in this because Venom is going to sell. Raimi didn't want it, but he moved aside because he realized, look, yes, the second film was down. Okay, here we go. Spider-Man 3 ends up coming out. The video game is a complete disaster on every single console it's on, and a major step back. the action figures are not selling as much, and of course the film goes down in ratings, and the box office is decent, but again, it shows problems. There are problems with Sony, but they already greenlit Spider-Man 4, and it was being fast-tracked because it has to be. Sony had a 5-year buffer between sequels, but they had to get certain things in order by certain times. So the script had to be in development within 16 to 18 months after the last film, pre-production within 2 years, and I believe 4 to 6 months, and then the film had to be wrap producing at one point, and here's your post-production, put it out within 5 years. And due to some ongoing problems, and of course Spider-Man 4 being canceled, Sony found themselves backed up against the wall. So to be able to extend their use of Spider-Man, they sold all the rights, merchandise, and all that back to Marvel, who was at this time owned by Disney, in 2011. Now, this is where things get very, very interesting, because it was the year prior, on January 11th of 2010, that it was announced that Spider-Man 4 was officially dead, and the Amazing Spider-Man reboot was happening. But again, due to certain restrictions, money, what was going on, extending the deal, wanting to keep Spider-Man, within the next year, the rights were sold back. Now, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 faced its own problems along with The Amazing Spider-Man 1, which featured far less, but The Amazing Spider-Man 1 was more or less a smooth process. Sony knew what they were doing. The budget was, of course, brought down compared to what people expected. Let's put it that way. It was still expensive, well over $200 million, but the film made $758 million. So, off the back of that, obviously a sequel and a bunch of other films were greenlit. Avi Arad and Amy Pascal being chief among the people greenlighting these. Sinister Six, TASM 3, TASM 4, Aunt May film was entering spin-off development. Venom was going to happen. But what happened was, during the early stages of the development of TASM 3, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 came out, and well, you guys know the history of what happened there. It fails at the box office with a budget that skyrocketed. The fans did not want this, as Sony was shifting tone from TASM 1. At that time, they were also producing far less merchandise based on Spider-Man. His sales were substantially down year over year, which I've talked about on this channel for well over a decade at this point. You know, Spider-Man went from being the top-selling merchandise for comic books, and we're talking a margin of 10-1 to like a 3-1. Like, the franchise really hurt. Sony was backed up against the wall, and that leads us into the end of the TASM universe, and officially we start the Marvel Studios integration of Spider-Man. This happens very quick, but this is where things were very badly planned because of how quick they wanted it to happen. So when they got the approval that yes, you can use Spider-Man, we know, as Kevin Feige stated, he told them right then and there, as the script was nearing completion, they can include Spider-Man, and that they were going to lock him in with this contract. So the writers for Civil War quickly went in, they wrote a quick introduction scene to Spider-Man, of course, this being the one with Tony Stark and Aunt May, and then he just stands in for another character that they could have written or removed or swapped in the Civil War battle, and there you go. But the devil was in the details, because if you guys remember all the way back when Spider-Man Homecoming was happening and they were talking about Homecoming along with Civil War, they were talking about, specifically Amy Pascal was talking about, and Avi Arad is still attached, mind you, at the hip for Spider-Man, that their films would be adjacent. Now, the contract that Marvel Studios and Sony structured was very loose, let's put it that way. I know some details I can't talk about in depth because they might give away some stuff, but essentially, Sony was able to use Tom Holland's Spider-Man however they saw fit. And they could play with the idea that it's the same Spider-Man, they just couldn't acknowledge the MCU in any direct way. Marvel Studios was allowed what is essentially a 3-picture deal with probation. And the 3-picture deal involved the first 3 appearances. But we're talking about just straight up appearances and not a cameo role. So what happened was everything was smooth sailing throughout like the entire production and releases of everything, including Avengers Endgame. But with Spider-Man Far From Home, this is where things really fell apart. Because what happened was the 3 concrete appearances and the cameos were done. They were done, and now the contract was up. Now, Tom Holland still had one more cameo left on his contract, but here lies the problem with the bigger picture. The way Sony was treated and the way they were treating Marvel was not working. So what happened was, and I covered this exclusively first for Venom 1, and people didn't believe me, then it was confirmed. Sony wanted Tom Holland in Venom 1. They wanted him to make a cameo at the end. Marvel Studios put their foot down and said no, because this breaches this part of the contract. Sony then would look at this and feel disrespected, and that's why they decided to pull the card that they did by pulling Spider-Man out of the MCU after Far From Home. Now, if you guys remember, almost a year to the date of Far From Home, I released a video on how this was going to happen. And that got me a lot of hate. But then people realized every single thing I said in that video was right a year after. Because again, the source that's telling me everything I'm telling you in this video was the same one that told me that. That's why I made the video. Because I trust them. 100% trust. Nothing but trust. Because they've proven to be authentic and showed me exactly what I need to trust them, right? So, with Spider-Man gone, there was that whole public war between Sony and Disney. And they signed what I am told is a temporary, like, amended contract. That's the best way I can put it. Essentially, we are going to do things the way we did the first initial contract for Tom Holland's Spider-Man. But this time, if Sony wants to use him, they can. The problem here is Sony saw success with Venom. And they decided to say, you know what? We don't need Spider-Man for any of our films, but we desperately want Venom to get the rub of the MCU. So they worked out Spider-Man No Way Home, having Venom make a brief cameo, Tom Holland at the end of Venom Let There Be Carnage, to try to connect the dots, to pull one over on the fans. It succeeded. The contract then, by the time No Way Home was out, was officially over, because it was just an extension of what they had before. And this is where we get into where we are today with what's going on with Spider-Man. Because Sony is still the owners of Spider-Man. They still own Spider-Man wholesale. When it comes to film, they own him. But Sony was able to do something very different that nobody saw coming while this was happening. While they were producing their films, they were able to lock down Insomniac Games for Spider-Man. And they, by way of locking down Insomniac, were able to then make Spider-Man exclusive with a deal with Marvel to extend their almost exclusive perception of Spider-Man, if you will. But again, remember, Spider-Man video games are not exclusive. If Sony wanted to, they can publish them on Nintendo and Xbox consoles. They do it on PC, but they want Sony associated with Spider-Man. And this is just a small part of the contract that has a bigger implication. When we get back to the Marvel Studio side of things, this is where things get a little out of hand. As the contract ended the last time, in recent negotiations, from what I've been told, Sony is asking for a bigger piece of the pie. And we don't know what the exact split of revenue is, but every single Marvel Studios Spider-Man film that's made by the MCU, there is a split in the revenue of who gets what. I have been told Sony wants more, and Marvel has agreed to more. But when Spider-Man appears in the big crossover films, Sony will get a small percentage of it like they did before, but merchandise of Spider-Man will obviously naturally affect everything that's going on, so the film will still make more money, right? It all carries over. So Sony's not getting anything action figure or anything. Marvel's keeping that, which is why Sony wants a bigger piece of the pie. But the problems on Sony's side begin with what happened the last 2 years with their Spider-Man universe. So what happened was, after they gave Spider-Man over to Marvel after TASM 2, Sony started their own development, and Venom was actually something I can confirm that Marvel Studios wanted. They wanted to do the whole Venom saga, but Sony was insistent on, no, we're going to do it on our own. We're going to do this our way. So when Sony wanted to add Venom into the MCU to get the rub, Marvel Studios and Disney saw this as a spit in their face, because they already asked to do Venom down the road, and Sony said no, but now they want it the other way around. So okay, they bent over for that, and Sony got that hubris, that boost of, well, they'll see Venom, they'll see everything, right? So Morbius, Kraven, Madam Web, Jackpot, tons of other characters were all announced, with Sony believing, hey, if we put it out Spider-Man based, it's gonna work. Marvel told them, don't do this, work with us. There was even a conversation to include the Spider-Women in the MCU to try to make things work, but Sony wasn't having it. They just want to produce their own thing because they don't want revenue share, which again, they made more money off of the MCU Spider-Man films on their own than they ever did with the TASM franchise. And obviously not more than the Raimi stuff because they own the licensing and merchant stuff, but still, they made the most amount of money by not doing anything with Spider-Man with the MCU Spider-Man. But they felt like, hey, we own the film rights, we want this. So what's happened is that ever since Spider-Man No Way Home, the reason it's taking longer to get to Spider-Man, and this is where I'm dropping all the stuff that I recently learned, Marvel Studios and Sony have been in discussion for a new contract and an extension and a reassessment of their old contract, and sort of let's refresh it for something that'll work out to all of our benefits today. And that largely consists of Marvel Studios telling them, stop doing these things on your own because they're not working. Work with us on everything and it will work. We can make this work. We can make Kraven work if you work with us because we want Kraven. But remember, Kraven was ripped out of Spider-Man No Way Home, where he was supposed to be the main villain, because Sony argued, no, because of all the fallout, they swiped that film off the slate and said it needs to be a multiverse film because we want our Avengers film. That is still very true today. And Sony is back to doing the same thing they did with TASM 3 and TASM 2 and Spider-Man 4 and Spider-Man 3. The heads at Sony, their chairmen, their CEOs, everybody has to answer to their shareholders. The shareholders are constantly asking, why is Disney handling our most valuable property? And Sony is telling them, we'll take care of this. So what's happened, and this is a big one, nobody's talked about this, this is your exclusive per se, I guess. I mean, somebody's going to rip it off and use it as their own, I know it, but here you go. Sony is demanding the use of their characters. And I'm talking about, they put their foot down for well over, from what I've been told, well over a year and a half to 2 years. They've put their foot down and said, you need to do what we want because this is a temp contract again. It's not as deep and it's quicker negotiating times. And Sony even recently stated they will continue to do their own thing, but this time they will consider using Spider-Man. Marvel Studios is still trying to argue to them, don't do this again. work with us. Yes, you're going to have less Spider-Man films. Yes, you're not putting out a Spider-Man film every year per se. But think about it this way. If they get it done right, they could put out a new Spider-Man every 2.5 to 3 years like clockwork, and Disney could have their way, and Spider-Man constantly appearing in all these things. And Disney's trying to argue for the use of Spider-Man on Disney Plus. I'm talking live action. Sony keeps saying no because they have sold Spider-Man exclusive streaming rights for live action to Amazon. And that puts a whole other wrench into this entire scenario. So what we got right now is a war that's literally down to contractual negotiations. But not only that, Sony is literally like a brick wall, and they are not moving. They do not want anybody to do anything or get through them. They want their way. And from what else I've been told is that characters like No were purposefully thrown into Venom 3 just to be able to cement this multiverse factor, because Sony saw what Marvel was doing with multiverse when they were working on Spider-Man No Way Home. And the decision to add No was made only in a response to that. So Sony has, again, gone back to their old ways where they are doing things the way they want, the way they think it should be done, and not taking input. The problem is this time they're working within the confines of the MCU and can use Tom Holland. And Marvel doesn't want them to. So the contract that they're trying to work out in place for Spider-Man 4 is sort of caught between multiple different factors, from investors on both sides to the producers, executive producers, and the heads of studios on each side, to Spider-Man being stuck in the middle, being pulled between two franchises, and Sony arguing that they can do this without anybody else, which we know they can't because we've seen what they produce. Marvel is trying to tell them to lay off. They are not laying off. They are, in fact, doubling and tripling, quadrupling down on what they've done. So, in essence, Sony is effectively looking to ruin Spider-Man again just to get what they want. And what they want is their characters popping up in MCU films because they want to continue to use those characters in their own solo affairs. And what else I've been told is that they are worried over at Marvel Studios that if they introduce a character like Scorpion in the next film, Sony has the ability to automatically take that actor and the contract, because it's signed two ways, and announce a Scorpion film starring Spider-Man. And Marvel doesn't want that because they already exercised that with the likes of Vulture, and were trying to do it with other characters and villains like Mysterio, who had a standalone film in development. And Marvel Studios is literally deadlocked in this argument with them because they're trying to prevent that, but Sony doesn't want to bend over and do that because they know that they can fool people, or at least they think they can. So there you go. A bit of a longer video, but I've explained every single thing that I've learned in the last month and a half or so talking to somebody. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this longer video, and take care till next time. Thank you for checking out that video, and thank you for your continued support. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, do whatever you will. And if you're so inclined and would like some additional content from us, which includes unfiltered content and bonus discussions, we do offer exclusively in our member section. We hope to see you there. So thank you for watching, and have a good one.